Hello, this is Eddie Barragon, and I'm here to discuss the pros and cons of online versus physical learning environments. And thank you for tuning in to my presentation, and I hope you get some good perspective from my presentation. Thank you. To kind of highlight some of the main connections between online learning and physically learning within a classroom setting. They both require adult learners to be self-motivated. You still have to have the discipline to carry out the instruction, whether it be digitally or something spoken to you within the classroom. As adult learners, it's our responsibility to maintain the quality and the standards that are being upheld in the class. We have to listen to the feedback from our professors. Again, it really doesn't matter if it's written to us, spoken to us. The main takeaway really is that there's no substantial difference in what we're learning. The only real difference is the execution and the approach. And as adult learners, we have to be flexible enough so that we are able to perform equally well in both situations. That's really the main similarity that I want to touch upon, is just as adult learners, we have to learn just how to govern ourselves either way. One of the main differences between online learning and physically learning is there is an inherent lack of interpersonal connection and interpersonal, I want to say intimacy in terms of the psychological and emotional connection that we may have with our professors in an academic setting, but also our fellow students, our peers. Physical learning is much more hands-on, much more experience-based, much more practical. Being in a laboratory setting, right? We have to perform a task or accomplish a certain set of instructions within an allotted time. Physical learning, it allows for the development of interpersonal relationships a lot more easily. Obviously, we're surrounded by people. We can have conversations, we can shoot the breeze, we can talk about the weather, things like that. That does have an impact on our learning style. That does have an impact on how we take up information by being able to directly ask questions at the drop of a hat. Whereas online learning, it is more restricted and limited. I don't want to say restricted, it's much more limited. It's inherently less forgiving of students who need that connection, right? But at the same time, there are students such as myself who do better in this type of environment, where we're able to take things at our own pace. We're able to look at the information, read it, and digest it on our own accord, and study on our own terms and our own schedule. For me, that really works very well, even if that comes at the sacrifice of the interpersonal relationships and connections that would be formed with other people. That has its place. That has its benefits. There is no perfect program because physically learning for some students, it's very, very constrained as well. You have an hour in a lecture, and then you have a physical piece of paper you have to work on and turn in within a certain time frame, as opposed to a learning environment online where you have a set of assignments given to you, and you have roughly a week or a few days to read it, understand it, process it, and complete it at your own pace. And that is volumes of help for a lot of students who are deeper learners, if not necessarily fast learners, such as myself. So there are pros and cons. No system is perfect, but those are the main differences of online and physical learning. Okay. Um, so, learning theories. Um, in terms of helping in the application of our learning styles, right? Both as learners, adult learners, and future educators, understanding the place that learning theories have in both models, both practices, is very important. I would argue very much so that for online learning especially, the learning theory of self-directed learning takes precedence, whereas we have to work out our own systems in an online environment of what works for us, how to read, how to complete assignments within a given time frame, how to communicate with our professors, how to formulate our responses to discussion questions. It's much more in line with self-directed learning, I think. Just by the very nature of the limited scope of the program, not limited in discipline and quality, but just our actions, right? We cannot physically go up and speak to someone in this type of program. That's fine. That only gives us the ability to really be more introspective in an online program. And that's perfectly in line with self-directed learning. Physically is very different. Experiential learning is a good example of, or a good breakdown of how physical learning works and is beneficial to, I'd say, more to certain students than others, but it has its place. It has its merit. Learning by example, learning by correspondence, learning by a visual representation. We don't have that necessarily in an online classroom all the time. We don't get to see what it's like for a teacher to physically speak to a physical student and instruct them on the assignment, on the material, on the learning recommendations. Um, there are people who work better when they have that hands-on experiential type of learning, and I think that's a really good example of just the physical benefits that come with a classroom setting, with brick and mortar type of environment. It's just it's a discipline. They're both disciplined perspectives and takes. I would say these are the learning theories that really highlight the similarities and differences on how to best go about it as learners and future educators. So there are challenges for presenting information uh, in both styles as future educators. That is kind of the main difference when we become professors or teachers in our own right. Will be online learning will be dictated by what we write, what we type, what we present in a digital format. Video lectures, that's a great example, where the student will be able to listen to what we have. And that's actually one of the main benefits that I didn't get a chance to go over, is a video lecture as opposed to a physical lecture. You can't really interrupt a lecture and have that go on for hours and hours, right? Whereas if it's a video format on an online learning class, this hasn't really been the case in my experience so far, but if I had a video lecture to watch, to pause, to come back to at my own pace, and this is the case with the online reading materials, I can go back to them whenever I want, the assignment and syllabus whenever I want. I can read the discussion questions and see what my professor and other students are saying whenever I want. That is a huge benefit. That learning how to operate like that within the confines of online structure is catamount to doing well in this type of environment. Physical learning, I think for most of us as adult learners, we all have prior experience with this. physical learning, it's always going to be inherently more beneficial to some students, especially, but to have that in-person dialogue, to have that experience of your professor going over things and being able to raise your hand and ask a question. There's merit for that. I think the main difference when it comes to future educators and presenting information in either way is learning how to do online teaching in a structured, presentable manner, whereas physical learning is going to be much more experience, hands-on based. I think that's the best way to really highlight the pros of both. And depending on what you're teaching or how you're teaching, it'll be up to the educator to determine what works best for them in that situation. But both are very valuable paths for teaching students either way. And there is no one size fits all. Different students are going to react and benefit differently to each method, and by class too. That's kind of the main thing I wanted to go over when it comes to teaching by example, what we're learning here in this program, and how to carry that on in our careers. In conclusion, I just wanted to kind of break down and give highlights of the main thoughts and main takeaways from this presentation. Online learning has its benefits. In my opinion, I prefer it. It's just more in line with my own personality. But at the same time, I've had great and wonderful physical online experiences as well in my undergraduate career and beforehand, high school, elementary, etc., early college. And there is no perfect way. That's something I do want to emphasize. Different things work for different people. Different methodologies are going to be better suited for different educators. Different learning styles are going to be more beneficial for different students. It's all a give and take. There is no perfect system. There is nothing that is going to be a one-size-fits-all approach to each and every student from each and every educator. And ultimately, depending on the program, it's equal parts information presented from the professor and discipline and self-motivation on the student's part, right? Ultimately, it is our education. It is our responsibility to do well within the confines of the program. So there's that, and that's really the main takeaway. Thank you for listening to my presentation. And regardless of whether it's physically or online learning, there's always room for growth and improvement. There's always the space for feedback, and they're both great learning styles, and they both have their merits. Thank you. This has been Eddie Barragon.